And now I'm stuck. Okay, one second. There we go. Hi. My name is Paul Morgan. I'm here to speak about beyond sustainability curriculum integration, educating otherwise. This is something we do in higher ed to improve the chances that our graduates be prepared to handle the challenges of sustainability. And this is going to take a kind of a different view, but we'll see. So in May of 2024, what's going to happen? Well, hopefully all over North America and lots of other places, graduation. And so here certainly will be lots of folks here at Westchester University graduating. It's always a fun time. But when we're thinking about sustainability curriculum integration initiatives, we have to have some kind of theory of change. What is it that we think we're accomplishing and how are we going to do it? And there we go. It usually goes like this. Imagine this, right? Each year, and it's not always May, but there's also December and on August graduations, but roughly 2 million bachelor's degrees are awarded each year and 1 million graduate degrees. So if we say every May of the millions of graduates, a critical number fan out into communities and into every profession where they have the understanding, vision, and practical experience to help lead efforts to regenerate everything. That's kind of what we're hoping is going to happen, right? Is it happening? Is it working? And that's the question. And I think a lot those of us who work in this and are honest about it can say, well, not yet. It's not happening yet, and that's okay. And one of the concerns is that there's a big gap between kind of the scale of the challenges as we understand them and what we're doing to address them. And so we can talk about mind the gaps such as this in the London Tube. And the big question for us, of course, is how do we bridge the gap? How can we make sure that our efforts are actually doing what we want them to do? The concern is we're doing a lot of this, kind of doing a lot of sustainability sprinkling. We'll do a little assignment here, change a reading there. And so we could say, yes, my course has sustainability in it. But, is it really having a difference other than kind of seasoning, business as usual, as I like to talk about it? You could call it, this, which is actual photo of rearranged deck chairs on the Titanic, or is it something else? And so a hard truth, and this is a slide I've used for decades, but it's still true. Almost everything being done in the name of sustainable development or just sustainability addresses and attempts to reduce unsustainability. But reducing unsustainability, although critical, does not and will not create sustainability. Well, what does that mean? That's the elephant in the room. Here, for example, is one of the largest green roofs in the world. This is the Ford Rouge plant in Dearborn, Michigan, a fabulous thing. What's the problem? That's what pops out the other end. So we have a sustainable factory, quote unquote, but this is what pops out the other end. But actually, this is no longer what pops out the other end. This is what pops out the Ford F-150 electric truck. So is that okay? Are we like, whew, work done? We finished it. We got them to produce the electric trucks. Well, no, because we need to be very clear about our language. Is this more sustainable? No, we need to be precise and call that less unsustainable, right? Not a bad thing. If you're smoking 5 packs a day and you go down to 2, that's a good thing, but you're still addicted to nicotine, all right? So it's less unsustainable, all right? So let's be clear about that. Here at Westchester University, we've got our own green roof, not quite as big as the Ford Rouge plant, but the same question applies. What are we popping out the other end? Is it Ford F-150s? No, it's graduates. And we can think that we're making them more sustainable, but most of what our efforts have accomplished is, again, less unsustainability. Our graduates are probably less likely to do harm to themselves, the planet, and others than previously, but we're still in a situation where we haven't cracked the nut. And in the words of our colleague, Tim Lutz, how do we ensure that our graduates are not our institution's most harmful emissions, right? That's always been the challenge of sustainability curriculum integration. The conundrum here is that higher ed institutions, including Westchester, have not yet made the bold transformations needed to address the depth, scale, and nature of the challenges. It all amounts to business as usual with a little more green on the fringe. Business as usual with a little more green on the fringe, okay? So what do we do? That's the big question. What are we going to do about this? One possibility is more of what we're already doing, just sort of with more energy or a few more people or a few more assignments. I call that the fallacy of sustainability education, because it's kind of like those definitions of, stupidity. It's like, we just keep doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting a different result. So certainly it's not a bad thing. It's not bad what institutions are doing, but let's not buy into this idea that if we just, push a little harder, suddenly we're going to have magical transformations and we're going to bridge the gap, because I don't believe that's the case. And given that, we ought to have some clarity about what we're up to, particularly our assumptions. So I would argue that we need clarity about scope, scale, and nature of the challenge we're facing so that we can approach our work with inspired, courageous purpose, right? And we need clarity about what we think we're doing and why, so we can actually produce graduates who are empowered to work towards a sustainable future, right? So some clarity about that. So the first question, and I think we ought to be asking this of each other all the time, because it gives us a sense of, where do we stand? Where do you stand on this big question? How serious is our predicament? We look outside, is it, we're going to gauge the temperature, high, low, happy, unhappy. So one possibility is everything's fine, keep shopping. And if that's your view, you can exit now, get out there, do it. And let's be real, for a lot of folks in the world, this is how they view the sustainability challenge. Oh, come on, everything's basically fine. You recycle, so we're good, right? Well, probably not, but that's an option. Number two, this is solvable. Emphasis on solutions, right? The problems can be addressed adequately with changes to policy, practice, plus technological solutions, right? And there's a lot of folks, and certainly the history of higher education and sustainability has been kind of this. We're going to transform, for instance, at Westchester University from our coal-fired boiler to our geo-exchange system. That's, technologies. We're going to hopefully change some policies around things. It's all good stuff. Transformation needed. Maybe this is your view. We will need to take concerted collective action and mobilize political will in order to enable the kind of transformations that can adequately address the serious problems we face. And I'm not going to call anybody out, but a lot of folks, particularly in higher ed these days, this is kind of where we're landing. Heavy emphasis on making sure that those who aren't represented are represented, making sure we're addressing political challenges, systemic racism, environmental justice, all kinds of things that play into this idea of transformation, right? But there's other possibilities. Two more, I would say. One, time to hospice modernity. Not kill it, not pull the plug, but to hospice modernity, which we're all beneficiaries of, right? And this argues that the depth and magnitude of the problems we face will make impossible the continuity of our existing ways, knowing, being, and relating. We will need to disinvest from dominant problem-solving strategies, tap into exiled capacities to address these challenges, right? Maybe so. It could be that we're not going to really fundamentally address our challenges until we get at the most fundamental cultural assumptions, our worldview, right? There is another view, which is, apocalypse ahead. It's like this. We might as well go have a drink and shut this down because we're cooked, right? I do not subscribe to that, but I do like a margarita now and again. So what's the right answer here? Is it 1, keep shopping, 2, solutionism, 3, transformation, 4, hospice modernity, or shall we go have a drink because we're cooked, right? I'm going to say all of the above, minus the shopping and the imminent apocalypse. Okay? So why are solutions and collective action not enough in themselves? Why do we also need to entertain hospicing modernity, in other words? Right? Some answers, then we'll unpack this in detail. Well, one is that, those two will never do more than make an unsustainable system somewhat less unsustainable, okay? We're only going to get so far with technological solutions and having better representation in rooms like this, right? It's also the case that successes within business as usual tend to decrease creative tension. It's like we got our geothermal plant here, pat on the back, congratulations, awards all around. Woo, we got that coal thing, dismantled. We can relax now. And so it doesn't keep the pressure on, and therefore we don't transform. Right? And the third point, we literally can't imagine what a sustainable future looks like. All right. Now this sounds odd, because a lot of folks these days in the sustainability world say we need to talk more about positive visions of the future, about the good work that's going on, not the doom and gloom. But the problem with that, and as I'll show, is I think it plays into this idea that we can actually imagine a sustainable future. I don't think we can. All right, and so that'll be something we'll chew on as we go along here. So let's do the thought experiment. And this is something I used to kind of do just as a standalone shtick, right? And it goes like this. At some point in the near future, yep, the shit's going to hit the fan. Okay, I just said that on. Yeah. And this is a thought experiment, not apocalypse, but something like this, if Miami were to go under, not an actual photograph, but you get the idea. If this were to happen, right? Or pick your favorite scenario from David Wallace Wells' book, The Uninhabitable Earth, or the opening chapter of Kim Stanley Robinson's The Ministry for the Future, which depicts a harrowing experience in India when there's a heat wave, power goes out, and literally millions upon millions of people die, right? If that were to happen today, everybody, including leaders of higher ed institutions, would be like, okay, yep, it's real, and we need to do something about this now. It would become a pivotal moment. Suddenly all the barriers to implementation of the stuff we're interested in would go away, and we'd be good. And at this point, educators and people who work in higher ed and K-12 and every other facet of society would be called upon to present our plans for rapidly transforming the purposes and practices of higher ed, because we would realize there would be no denying it anymore. This is real, and we better get on it because we could be next, that kind of a scenario. This is not far-fetched because that's exactly what happened with the pandemic. This thing happened, the shit hit the fan, and all kinds of institutions had to rapidly pivot and do things really differently because we were forced to. And, people were pretty creative. It wasn't a full-on success, but these kinds of scenarios are absolutely, possible. So what do we do? What would we do? What initiatives, what purposes, what kind of learning would help us transform beyond business as usual, right? What would higher ed have to be or become once the shit hits the fan, right? So we do this in groups, and I would say, yeah. But I've done this a number of times, and what I've realized is that most of us, myself included, have trouble imagining anything other than schooling as usual with some greener stuff and a greener curriculum we talked about, which is just kind of like, yeah, we read this book instead of this book, and we're going to have this assignment instead of that assignment, all right? We have trouble doing that because the juggernaut of modernity, all right? This is the train we are on. This is our civilization chugging along these tracks. The science is absolutely clear. If we keep going in this direction, we are going to end up in real danger. It's very clear, all right? No question about this. Right? And so we're busy. We're busy greening the train, right? You can have your reusable straw on the train, and we'll have our curriculum integration initiatives on the train, and we'll eat sustainable local food on the train, and we'll drink organic kombucha on the train. It'll be I don't know, like the train will have a green roof, hybrid train, whatever. What's the problem? We're still on the train, and it's chugging ahead rapidly toward, a problematic future, right? That's the problem. It is a unique historical moment because, yes, for the first time in human history, a particular worldview, the one we occupy, is becoming conscious of its own impending fall and has the opportunity to consciously reforge its worldview to accomplish that. We can do this, but we're stuck on the juggernaut of modernity. Why? The answer is because it's not out there. It's in us. It is so deep in us. Think about those spirochetes of like Lyme disease, deep in us. Modernity, is it in you? And the answer is yes. It's in you, it's in me, all of us. And I'd argue that we are entranced by a vision of the future that's been implanted in our minds. If I ask you, and I've done this thousands of times now, what's that vision? We're to wake up tomorrow and I told you it's going to be the future. What would you look out the window? What would you have to see? What would you like to see to confirm? Yep, it's the future. Flying cars, thank you. That's fine. That's exactly it. Because we know what the future looks like, and it looks like flying cars, the Jetsons. Never mind that this was all weird. It's only white folks flying around in a world where you don't see the world, no trees, eating food out of machines. And it's Back to the Future, flying DeLorean, Blade Runner, thank you. Blade Runner 2049, flying police cars, don't worry. Based on a novel by Philip K. Dick called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? The point was, yes, we are going to have a future where there are flying cars and genetically modified critters, but it's going to be a social and ecological nightmare. And we are rapidly creating it because we have to have the flying cars. That's our future. That's what we deserve. We know what it looks like. That's where the train is taking us. We know what it's supposed to be. And, damn everything else along the way, because we are going to have them. And so we're stuck on this thing, and we are sure that we have this gleaming future there. And we recognize that there are problems. And so we're just going to have the same thing, only with more green, more trees. We're going to have lots of green roofs, and we'll, have the good local organic kombucha and everything else. But that's not enough. And if you do think it's enough, I think you're wrong. And we can debate that. All right. If you think that's enough, I think you're mistaken. And so that's where we need to go. And this is what I said earlier about the problem of imagining a future that's actually sustainable. T.S. Eliot, I said to my soul, be still and wait without hope, for hope would be hope for the wrong thing. And so all the people in sustainability are telling us these days, we need to have hope. We need to have positive visions of the future. But if it looks like the greening of this, it's the wrong thing, I would argue, because it goes too deep. We can't just green business as usual and expect that to be fine. No sacrifices. It's like, well, be fine. I'll just swap out the veggie burger for the meat burger, and we have sustainability because we've swapped out things. We haven't touched any of the fundamental assumptions, right? So what's the right answer now? We go back to this question. Like I said, all of the above minus the shopping and with some modifications. Now I'm going to draw on Joanna Macy here, who's one of my heroes. And you can read that, that's nice. But what I'm really interested in is she organizes our efforts into what we ought to be doing into three baskets, but they're connected baskets, of course, no dualism. Holding actions, structural changes, and shifts in consciousness. We'll elaborate a little bit here. So the first, actions to slow damage to Earth and its beings, all right? We need to do this. There's damage going on right now. Forests are being cut down, animals are going extinct, people who live in environmental justice zones are suffering the brunt of pollution and more. There's all kinds of suffering that can be alleviated right now. And some of this can be addressed through policies and technologies and behavioral changes. So yes, let's do that, all right? But we also need to walk and chew gum and comb our hair and do a few other things at the same time. Analysis and transformation of the foundations of our common life. This is the structural changes, the ways in which we need to think about how systems are a problem, including systems, of injustice and racism and sexism and everything else, right? And then third, a fundamental shift in worldview and values, right? That we need. So, for the most part, higher ed has been focused on the kind of stuff that I would call the holding actions. We're gonna, swap out this for that. We're gonna try to improve our fleet. It is less polluting. We're going to try to do better purchasing, so we have recycled paper in the copiers and not unrecycled paper, and that's all good. And there's policies and behavior changes that can work, and we should be doing that. The structural changes, this is now a heavy emphasis, like ASHE conference that Brad mentioned earlier. Now they're trying in a serious way to address issues of structural inequalities so that it's not a largely white movement, white middle class suburban movement. And so there's a whole lot to do with dealing with the structural challenges. But there's also, I would say, all-encompassing issue of shifts in consciousness, because these things are never going to get the traction that they need if we don't change how we think about ourselves, how we fit into the world, how we think we came to be, what we think the purpose of life is, the kinds of questions that ought to be, at least in our ideals, addressed in like a liberal arts education at a college or university. Dealing with them in real ways, not in superficial ways, dealing with them in fundamental, experiential ways, not as content to be learned, right? And so we have an opportunity in higher ed to actually make a big dent in the shifting consciousness category, because that is what we do or should be doing. And maybe, we're mistaken about the golden age when we used to do it, but that golden age can be in the future. Daniel Quinn, in the book, piece called The New Renaissance, says, if we actually manage to survive here, it will be because we've moved into a new era as different from ours as the Renaissance was from the Middle Ages, and as unimaginable to us as the Renaissance was to the Middle Ages, all right? So whatever it is we need, it's up there and around the corner where we can't see it. So how's it going to come to be? Well, we need to sort of do some other ways of problem solving, right? So here are our kind of modified baskets that I think we ought to be doing in higher ed, particularly for sustainability curriculum integration initiatives. The first is, yes, the solution stuff. The problems cannot be addressed adequately with changes to policy and practice plus technological solutions, but we must slow damage to the earth and its beings. So we should do this stuff. Now, what I'm asking is people be able to see that bringing the reusable water bottle is a good thing, but this is not transforming my worldview or the planet, all right? It is a piece, and I need to understand that it's a small piece, a much bigger picture, and I need to understand the big picture and what, I'm working on. So there's that. Transformation needed. Yes, we will need to take concerted collective action and mobilize political will in order to enable the kind of transformations that can help address the serious problems we face. So yes, we need to work much more diligently on, the diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives that we need to be doing in sustainability work. That ought to be part of the curriculum. Absolutely, we need to step up the game there because that's absolutely essential, but also not sufficient. And then time to hospice modernity, which we'll get to. So, look at that. There's actually a book called Hospicing Modernity. How convenient. So this is by Vanessa Machado de Oliveira, and she and a group called the Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures Collective. If you'd like to visit them later, it's decolonialfutures.net. Some interesting stuff on there, mostly from folks who identify as global citizenship educators, and they come from a decolonial perspective, which you can learn more about if you visit there. But this, probably the most boring slide in terms of aesthetics, is the most important one in terms of content. So allow me to elaborate. So the first one, soft reform. The soft reform agenda is for higher ed particularly, and for higher ed curriculum integration. This has been historically what we've done. Make the same world a little better through transformations of policies and practices. We can imagine a political science class that says, okay, what kind of policies do we need to improve our chances of surviving climate change and sustainability stuff? Policy matters, sure, right? The horizon, though, is the single story of progress, development, evolution. This is the train tracks, a single story of where we're going, that gleaming future with the flying cars. That stays the same, all right? We're going to go there. We're just going to solve the little problems, by making it a green train, etc. Methodological critique, yada, yada, yada. So same questions, same answers. Soft reform. The middle, the radical reform, is where a lot of higher ed sustainability is right now, including folks who are trying to transform their courses to address the more systemic challenges of sustainability. And here, we're trying to make the same world a lot better by including more people, voices, and perspectives in collective action. It's much more inclusive, absolutely. The horizon is like a unification of stories into a single direction. Like we're taking the little feeder tracks, and everybody's going to get on the same train. We're including you too. You're welcome, right? Because you're going to be included in our trajectory toward this fabulous gleaming flying car future, right? And so it's an epistemological critique, and it's a focus on representation. We need different people in the room doing the business as usual, all right? And so this is the problem. And again, I don't want to minimize that because so many people have been kept out of the room, in harsh and real ways, that this is absolutely essential. We need to be far more inclusive in this work, right? But I would argue we need to do, in addition to that, which is the beyond reform category, disinvest in current unsustainable world and to walk with others into the possibility of movements, all right? We're trying to learn from the repeated mistakes in order to make different mistakes. And this is an ontological critique, which means it questions our understanding of being, right? What does it mean to be a human being on the planet at this very interesting time? Or even not at this time. What does it mean to be a human being, all right? Fundamental questions that we ought to be addressing in higher education, particularly as part of a robust, authentic liberal arts education. These are the fundamental questions, right? Different questions, different answers, all right? And this is from Wade Davis, the anthropologist, who kind of reminds us that, no, folks, there's other ways of being that humans represent. It's not just, us. The world in which we were born is just one model of reality. Other cultures are not failed attempts at being you. They're not failed attempts at being modern. They are unique manifestations of the human spirit. And this is good news because oftentimes when we talk about sustainability, it's like it gets labeled as humans have a problem. And I think that's mistaken. It's not that humans have a problem. It's a particular cultural, technological, economic manifestation of humans that has a problem, that operates from particular assumptions. There are humans on the planet right now, and they've been around a long time, who have a very different orientation to those ontological questions of what it means to be a human being. And that's good news because it means we can live otherwise. We can't, because there are people who are human who live otherwise, and they're doing just fine, thank you. Of course, just fine by their own standards. Of course, we judge them as not doing fine. They need to get developed. They're poor. they need to get with the program. They need to get on the train, in other words, right? And so here, this is a nice thing. If we were to structure a curriculum integration initiative that had all of these components, it would look like this. Yeah, you've got folks who teach courses that can address the technological, the economic, the political, the policy questions, the practices, resource flows. That stuff's important because that can help us reduce harm and make things less bad right now. That's not a bad thing. The relational change stuff has to do with relationships, connections, and power dynamics. This has to do with the structural inequities, that are addressing problems of racism and sexism and everything else. And this is the economic challenges, and when we've got some serious economic issues to address, et cetera. And then there is this other piece, which is the transformative change, which is mental models, worldviews, consciousness, the fundamental assumptions. Again, higher ed has an ability to intervene in all of these, all right? But it's our unique ability, our unique placement in being able to address the questions of being, of what it means to be a human being, et cetera. That's part of our liberal arts tradition, that we can really offer something that other facets of society can't, right? And so a threefold curriculum integration approach is like this. Greening, which is solutionist, let's do that. But again, the folks who are doing that, I would argue, need to understand that they are part of a bigger picture, right? That getting people to drive an electric car is not a bad thing, but you have to understand that it may be necessary, maybe, but absolutely not sufficient. It is not. And so if it's not sufficient, we can recognize that we need to do other things. And we are not going to prematurely congratulate ourselves for solving the problem because we bought an electric truck, of all things. And so the critical education for sustainability, this is a lot of the stuff that I've been interested in higher ed. How do you approach the sustainability challenge from that sense of critique of, all the kind of stuff where we're analyzing the nature of institutions, yada, yada, yada. And then there's the kind of, in its own category, the educating otherwise stuff, decolonial shifts in consciousness and worldview, et cetera. So 3 prongs all at the same time. So we might have questions. What does it look like when we talk about educating otherwise? It's not just, we'll just have the same liberal arts classes, only emphasize them more, or hope they make a difference, right? You got to do things differently. And as an example, I want to concretize this because it can be so, kind of airy that it's easy to dismiss. But I think it's not easy to dismiss. So this summer, one of the things I participated in was called Climate Wayfinding for Higher Ed. And it was organized by folks who had been one of the editors of the book, All We Can Save, which was all women authors on climate change, right? Really powerful stuff. And one of the readings that they had us do, this was like 3 pages. You can find it online. It comes out of Stanford. The Relational Work of Systems Change. Go read it. It's very short, but it really hit me. I was like, it was one of those where I'm like, oh my gosh, look at this, exclamation points, because it talked about something that was so simple in a way, but it needed to be said. I guess I was ready for it. So the relational work of systems change, it says 5 qualities. We can look at that. And there are things like transforming power dynamics, serendipity in the sacred, deep relational work, inner as well as outer chains, cultivating space for healing. They sound fine and interesting, and it'd be great to organize our higher ed teaching around this. But to give you a real taste of that, we need to think about what we're doing here as emergent change. Emergent change is different from the kind of change people typically do in organizations. Like at Westchester University, we'll get a new president soon, which means we'll probably have a new strategic plan, right? Can you have a strategic plan for changing people's consciousness? Does consciousness or worldview change, is that like a reasonable expectation for, a strategic plan? No, it's like, it doesn't work that way. It's not a technical thing. And so emergent change is what happens when you put people in a room, and that's what this climate wayfinding workshop was, for like 3 days, having deep, personal, emotional conversations about climate change and being, right? We don't have the solutions, right? But it creates an environment in which it's possible for surprising things to emerge, right? You have to be patient enough and trusting enough for those surprises to emerge. It's like creating really fertile soil, and we hope things will grow, right? It's not about dictating them, because whatever we're imagining It's just modernity in our heads again, trying to keep itself alive by saying, oh yeah, we need some changes and it'll look like this. No, that's it. And so it's an emergent approach. All right, that's a nice image. But this was the line that really got me. All right. It says, rarely do we work together in ways that catalyze shifts in individual and collective consciousness, powerful enough to transform systems. And here's the bold part, right? To get to more radical outcomes, we need more radical ways of working together. It's both as simple and as hard as that. And I think about this for all of us who are educators. That's what we need. Radical ways of working together, right? So, for example, I am finally going back to my roots here, graduate degree in philosophy and education, right? And I can tell you, as an expert in this field, right, that schooling as usual is not a radical way of working together, right? Here's your first decade, here's your syllabus, look at the assignments, make sure you show up. If you don't show up, you're gonna get this. It's this mechanical, technical, dehumanizing, authoritarian, on and on and on and on. It is not a radical way of working together. And you can substitute readings and assignments all you want. It's only going to get us so far in getting to the point of transformation, because the way we do schooling is so much a part of the problem. The way we do schooling is a part of the juggernaut of modernity. All right. What if we did learning otherwise? Right. So how about this? So one of the things that the decolonial folks want us to think about is, how has education contributed to the problem? All right. And which is why we can't do sustainability curriculum integration initiatives and assume that the normal way of doing schooling is fine. It's not. It's, you've heard the expression, the medium is the message, Marshall McLuhan. Let's start talking about the medium of classroom-based learning. It's a Wednesday at Chester University. That means we have classes Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 10 to 10:50 and 11 to 11:50. And 50 minutes is enough to do what? Information deposition, basically, right? Pour it in, pour it out, not radical, not fundamentally transformational. You can have a good class and they can be, but it's only gonna, move the needle so far. It's not going to get at those fundamentally consciousness altering experiences that need to be part of learning if we actually think we're going to get out of this alive, to put a point on it, right? So books like this, this is not new. This is why I got interested in philosophy of education. Ivan Illich, Deschooling Society, 1970, talks about the ways in which schooling undermines learning. He also does critique of other modern institutions, how healthcare industry undermines, guess what? Health. That policing undermines safety. So all of these big institutions that are part of modern society, they have good values at their base, but they tend to, in their operation, undermine the very thing that they're trying to promote. And this is classic. And here's the truth. Where do people learn to hate learning? School. There's no other place you can learn to hate learning, because learning is a natural human desire, capacity, passion, right? No 2-year-old says they hate learning, all right? Only people who have spent a lot of time in school learn to hate learning, all right? So that's why we need to talk about what's going on, all right? Illich says, most learning is not the result of instruction, it is rather the result of unhampered participation in a meaningful setting. And that might be a cocktail party, and that might be just hanging out on the beach, or something going on in the dorm room at 3 a.m. Most people learn best by being with it. It's like a 70s term. Yet school makes them identify their personal cognitive growth with elaborate planning and manipulation. Here are my learning outcomes and the goals of the course, and we're going to review it on the syllabus, and it's all bullshit. Let's just call it out, because it doesn't do it. It just makes us sophisticated rule followers who then need to be told what to do when the shit hits the fan, which totally undermines their ability to address the challenges that are coming our way, all right? Schooling is the advertising agency which makes you believe that you need the society as it is, all right? So there you have it. And I would argue our institutions must become simultaneously more like retreat centers, where we're getting to the real questions of being, deep navel gazing, there we are, but also much more engaged in the real gritty work of building a sustainable society. And that means much more community engagement. So simultaneously more philosophical and more practical. And right now it's doing neither particularly well, let's be honest. So transformation is often more about unlearning than learning. And I think one of the things we could do for sustainability curriculum integration is unlearn a lot of the things that we kind of learned just by being exposed to it. A lot of higher ed faculty don't take courses in education. They teach the way they were taught, and and the good ones try to do more and get exciting, but there's only so much you can do within the system as it is. That's what I got for you today. Thank you very much. Happy to take questions and objections. So you want to stop sharing here? Yeah. All right.
But everyone starting your education with internships and capstones at the very beginning.
Maybe do so. I know I have a quasi relative, first semester, first year student, is currently in Rome, studying Italian, deep immersive experience, drinking nice wine and espressos and things. And so we've got something to base our learning on, not just more schooling. Anyway. Yeah. So other questions, objections, comments? Okay, Tom, it was nice to see you.
Hey, Paul, how are you? Thank you so much for this presentation. This was great. I also read Hospicing Modernity in the spring, where I was coming back from a semester of maternity leave. So I feel like my whole world was like really shifted. To talk about like a world-changing event. And I've been reading a lot more kind of work by young Indigenous women who are going to different communities around the world and kind of bringing some of the knowledge of their ancestors with them. And they're talking a lot about that a lot of this work can only be done in small communities, right? Like kind of small settings of maybe a few hundred people, not thousands or tens of thousands or millions. So I'm wondering, like, with this idea of modernity ingrained in us, and a lot of our kind of large places where we gather are so populous, I guess, what do you see this looking like or being like if, I don't know, there's that disconnect between like kind of huge centers of people and population and the need for kind of gathering in more tightly knit, cohesive units that are, the people well in those settings?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And I mean, for me, the way I've been approaching it is, well, I'm trying to make my classes tightly knit groups where we're getting at things that are real and meaningful and authentic. And it's challenging because we only have like 15 weeks really. And so what can you do in that? But last few years, I've really shifted. We spend a lot of time doing what I call productively wasting time, which means we get to get it's like extended dance version, get to know each other activities. The students are not going to be open to transformation if they don't feel comfortable, and if they don't kind of get out of the mode, and I have to remind them repeatedly that that we're going to do things differently here. But everybody comes in with all of that accumulated baggage of what school is, how you do it, how you be successful at it, and it takes a long time to unlearn that, and so that you can be open to real meaningful kinds of interactions where we're not counting how many times people were absent or raised their hand or contributed something on a some chat, which I don't do that nonsense. But so that's a good place to start because they are smaller communities. But then of course, and then they go out and go to another class and it's completely different. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, I'm not that special. I'm not saying, but that's a place we can start. And I think having a community of people on a campus who want to pursue those things, then those kinds of experiences will be less idiosyncratic and be like, oh, okay, no, this is going to be part of the norm. How do we shift the norm so that students expect certain things? And I think we need to move away from this overemphasis on, planned student learning outcomes and all this. That is not emergent. Some of the best learning I experienced in my college education could never have shown up on a syllabus as like a learning outcome, right? It had to do with actually engaging with material, having aha moments that were to a certain extent particular to me and that time and everything else. And so it needs to be much less constricted and much more emergent. What does an emergent syllabus look like? Well, it's not something you hand out on the first day, I can tell you that. And so I think if we can have good conversations among faculty like you and others about how we can do this, I think that's what we can do where we are. And then, but also bringing in other voices. Clearly, you're talking about, being with people who are, young Indigenous women from around the world. I mean, yeah, you got to get like guys like me out of the way, so people can come in and have different experiences, hear different perspectives, different ways of knowing all of that. So anyway, I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to go to Dawn Mazzone now in the audience.
So thank you for weaving
Yeah.
big concepts so succinctly. And so I believe in simplicity, there's a lot of happiness and wisdom. And as the other woman just said about Indigenous people, they always sit in circle, and they come with a respect for each person. So, and the leader or the facilitator asks questions that spur the conversation of maybe the subject that's being explored. So that sense of communal and individual respect, that's something every college course could do,
Yeah.
coming from a new president or something, like we're not going to sit in the normal, format. We're going to sit in circle. I remember as a junior in high school, my chemistry teacher closed the chemistry book and said, we're not going to talk about chemistry. We're going to talk about life and death, because I just lost my best friend. And that has lived with me, I know, like forever. It was that basis of being, what does it mean to be a human?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, those kinds of things can be done. It's not difficult to arrange chairs in a circle, things like that. But it is also the case there are classrooms on campus where they're bolted down facing front, because that philosophy of, what education is literally built into the architecture of learning places. They're much more flexible these days, so you can do that. We understand that, but it doesn't mean it's really kind of baked into how people understand what's supposed to be going on. It's like we can still do like information deposition in a circle. We're just sitting in a circle and I'm doing a PowerPoint presentation all day, every day. So it has to be like, what are we doing? What are we trying to accomplish here? And can we trust that just because we weren't, doing a test, that there could have been profound learning? But it also means we need to get out of the building a lot more too, probably. Let's be honest about that. So good. So other thoughts? There's something in the chat. I don't know if these are. Yeah, especially if we still want funding from the. Yeah. Data driven, right. How do we move away from this? Yeah, well, that's a fair question. And certainly right now, we have ridden a pendulum in education to hopefully it's the end of the swing. The data-driven control, learning outcomes, standardization, and testing. I'm hoping people are going to see how limited that is in terms of its understanding of what a human being is and what's valuable in terms of learning. And it'll start swinging back another way. But that's where we are right now. We can call it neoliberalism. We can call it lots of other things, but it's a kind of a technicized version of learning that is not really fully appreciative of what it means to be a human being. It's just not. And so there are other ways to do that. And I'm hoping we can begin that shift back. And that's why I think this stuff appeals to me, because as an educator, I've had to make my individual choices about how I comply with that. And there's an element of compliance, but yeah, I have to comply with that, and then I'm going to forget about it. Right? I have to turn in grades at the end of the semester, and I will do that. And I'll keep my job and I'll help my students. But that doesn't mean I or the students have to stress out about that in some unreasonable sense. Right? We can focus on things that are real and meaningful, and that's okay. So and again, I think I did this last time. If you're a professor and if you've got tenure, well, you got to better start using that for something. There's so many timid people who either lack of creativity or imagination, or have become so domesticated in the process of getting a master's and a PhD and getting a tenure track job and doing all this stuff, that they're just used to complying. And then when you get to the point where you can take off, the leash, you got nothing to say, because you've spend too much time in the compliance mode. So if you've got tenure, you ought to do something with that. Push the boundaries a little bit. It's difficult to fire you. It is. Hi, Cheryl.
Hey, I'm trying to see past the cat. There's always a cat. If you have a Zoom, there's always going to be a cat. I think one of the ways I approach like your both and idea that we need all of it is this distinction that I see in education between those aha moments and between the kind of incremental changes that students, that all individuals make as they learn things.
Yep.
It's easy to point to those aha that kind of shift the whole paradigm in your brain. But then there's that real kind of daily grunt work that we do on our identities, et cetera. And so I'm thinking, for example, of that person who buys the electric Ford 150, right? It's bullshit from a sustainability point of view, right? But it can allow them to shift in their brain, either to say, okay, I've done my part, but it can also ask them to think, hey, I'm a person who has an EV now, right? And then it sets them up for like the next step in like evolution. Right. And so thinking about our students and them coming from all kinds of places, and they're on all different tracks. It seems to me that there's a place for in a really strong case for, as we think about transformational stuff, that incremental stuff, of making sure each class has got a reading in the syllabus just to start that Ford 150 EV process in all of our students' brains. I don't know if you have a response to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess one of the things I'll say is, in this presentation, I was kind of emphasizing the aha big picture stuff because I wanted to make a case for including that as a regular component of things of how we ought to be thinking about sustainability curriculum integration. And again, this, I'm a philosopher of education. I like the philosophical stuff. So this is, somewhat coming from me, my positionality here. But I'm a big fan of the other stuff. And one of my favorite koans I've been working with is this idea that it is easier to act a person into a new way of thinking than to think a person into a new way of acting. And it's that acting stuff like buying the EV or doing the gardening or whatever we're doing that's very can be very physical, task oriented, reading oriented, whatever it is, that stuff's important. There's lots of ways to get people to something. And I think we can make accommodations for folks who are big readers and some who aren't, folks who need to do something in order to have a shift. It's like if you go to Amsterdam, you don't have to take a class in learning to ride a bicycle. Everybody does it. You don't need special programs. It's just part of the culture. And so just kind of being there, you get that. And that's why, thinking of higher ed campuses as immersive learning opportunities is really valuable. But yeah, so I'm with you entirely. I'm just trying to make a case for making sure that we're looking at sustainability curriculum integration as three important facets. And I'm a big fan of the others too, but don't leave out the big picture consciousness stuff, because I don't think we're going to get to where we want to go without. So that's what I got. I don't know what your cat has to say about it, but So, other things?
Well,
go ahead, Walt.
Yes, as an educator and librarian, always enjoyed the role of libraries as a place outside of the curriculum, potentially where people could go and these aha moments sometimes. Well,
sure, and I think I don't know if I said we need aha moments, but that's where we're going. Right. But I think
the shifting consciousness.
Yeah, but we need to be thinking about just like life and death stuff. I mean, that's part of the human condition. Absolutely. So how do we bring those things in? And it may not be aha. There's interesting literature on this, sudden enlightenment versus gradual enlightenment. And for some folks, it's just a slow.
They go hand in hand.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes you have big things, and sometimes it's just a slow accretion, a slow accumulation of experiences, and that's where you are. It wasn't any big light bulb or anything, but there you are. So, but I think we need to come at that in lots of different kinds of ways. And I think what I'm saying is, and we can't do that just by having people, take a class where they're reading Kant and Hegel and then writing an essay about it. That's pedagogically, that doesn't get at the connection to what it means to be a human being, unless you're teaching it in a way that is trying to get at that. So let's be very clear. It's not about content and, can you compare and contrast these different, it's okay, but that's less likely to yield anything that's going to stick with people. So, but going to the library is that place where that's where it is. It's,
You can get outside the constraints of the curriculum.
Yeah.
You have time. That's the problem. A lot of people
Yeah.
have time.
and now I know I do all my reading on my phone now, so which is a whole nother question.
But the library can also be a place where people can come together and sit together and serve.
Yeah. No, it's
Yeah.
well, that's what actually Illich was interested in. Ivan Illich was, everybody's got something to teach. Everybody's got lots of things they need to learn. And we need to provide opportunities and spaces for that to happen so that it is unhampered participation in a meaningful setting, So you do that, all kinds of stuff bubbles up, which is why I used to hang out at the coffee shop when I was an undergrad, because it was unhampered participation. There was all kinds of interesting people there. You go, you talk about this, you talk about that. Far more interesting than many of the classes. So I got a lot of my undergrad education at the Daily Grind in Champaign, Illinois. Spent a lot of money on coffee, but it was really good.
I have another question for you in terms of revelatory readings that we're sitting around in circles and talking about. You read The Dawn of Everything, David Graeber and David.
No, it sounds good.
Yeah, it is really good, and they turn upside down, or they interrogate that whole idea of the notion of progress coming out.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Sure.
and have cases where people who, in the Western point of view, have been stuck in an early stage of so-called progress.
Mhm.
They have made conscious choices to
Yeah.
going down the road to avoid being like those people.
Yeah, we're not failures. Right.
Right.
Yeah, make different choices, right? So that's the imposition of like one way of being, the one right way to live, to progress, etc.
It's all based on the indigenous critiques of modernity that were coming out of the
Right.
18th century.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's why, my road into that was through like Wade Davis, who's like a good speaker. That's kind of what he's getting at, but I think that's the tradition. Yeah, it's like we need to listen to others who are like, oh, you guys are going down the wrong road. It's going to be very seductive, and very seductive it is. And now it's not just seductive, but manipulative, intentionally. That's where we're going. It's gonna be hard to get off that train. Hard enough to get off the phone, let alone the train.
There was one last question by Professor Prashada.
Yeah.
Who then mentioned that he had to run to a
Yeah.
class.
Hit and
But
run.
he asked, how would you address climate denial in sustainability education?
Yeah.
Seems to be increasing in the public.
Well, I've been teaching a long time, and classes I teach that involve climate change. 20 years ago, yeah, there was a lot of climate denial and this and that and and these days, I don't even address it. To be perfectly honest, just I kind of make little statements like, look, if there's a small chance, yeah, but the best science, and we're at an institution of higher education, right? We're interested in science, we're interested in data, we're interested in, truth value, and there's no good reason to believe that we ought to be stopping efforts to limit greenhouse gas emissions. It's like going to the racetrack with your life savings and betting on the long shot. Why would you do that? It's just kind of insanity. So I just don't entertain it anymore. Just say, no, we're not talking about that. And people might disagree with that, but that's just like, it's not even interesting. There's not much of the debate. There's a great John Oliver, is it John Oliver? Who does the kind of statistically representative thing, and he brings in 97 scientists, who say climate change is real, and then 3 who are denying it. Okay, so who are you going with? Why should we go with the long shot? Why should we say everything's fine because I think these 3 people got it? Then it's not about evidence, it's about a particular ideological persuasion. It's about lots of other things, but it's not about your understanding what's going on. So no, I deny the denialists. So we're just not going to go there.
Well, Carolyn committed just a couple weeks ago was saying that even in the Pennsylvania state legislature, she doesn't hear climate denialism anymore.
Yeah. It's just,
After this last summer.
yeah, there's just like so much going, it's like, yeah, fine, you know, you can do that. And there's people who think the moon land didn't happen and the earth is flat and things. Well, that's interesting, but we're not talking about that in this class. Not giving it any airtime. No oxygen, it will not live.
We are at 1 o'clock.
Okay, thank
So
you.
we need to end at least the formal part of this presentation and of the entire semester of sustainability research and practice seminar. So one last thank you to our final speaker.
Good. Happy to be the caboose.
All right, and please join us next semester for the spring 24th.